So yeah, I guess the biggest question on people's minds is going to be V3. When V3? What's happening with V3? Are we even going to call it V3? I was originally wanting to call it V2.1 because it felt like an incremental change to what we were doing. Just a few fixes, but as it turned out, we're fundamentally the protocol staying the same, but we are making some fairly big changes in how the mechanism all kind of fits together. So for an overview of what V2 did, so we have this concept of implied collateral, and the core epicenter of the implied collateral was the swing trader, and that was this whale that was just a contract that controlled a ton of money and would just step in and defend peg whenever it could. It would just step in and buy back malt when it was under peg, return the price back up to peg. And that was a good concept. And I think I was actually very pleased with how V2 went overall. Obviously, we timed it horrifically badly, given that we launched the day that UST started to depeg, which was unfortunate. But with that said, I think it worked really well, with a few caveats. So one thing that many people pointed out was that the swing trader was a bit too aggressive. It was stepping in way too early, and there was a whale that ended up depleting quite a lot of the swing trader because they stepped in. The swing trader would step in and buy back, and then the whale just waited for the peg to be regained and then sold more, and then the swing trader stepped in, and effectively this whale, whoever they may be, used the protocol's implied collateral in the swing trader as exit liquidity for their position. And there were a few people who raised concerns around that, which rightfully so, and they were saying that this whale had exploited the protocol. I actually disagree with that categorization. I don't think they did exploit it. And yes, Jasmine, this will be recorded. So yeah, you can check back. We'll post it on the internet at some point. Will it still be based on DAI? Yes, it will, initially. But as I've said many times, DAI is just a stepping stone, as is Polygon. We're doing Polygon on DAI initially, get the thing working. Once we've got the thing working, we'll roll it out on as many stable coins as we can, roll it out on non-stable pools, and on as many different chains as we can. But we're very much in this kind of early phase of developing the mechanism. Once that's there, then we'll branch out quickly. But back to the kind of point of the swing trader. I don't think the swing trader was exploited. I think that whale was just clever, in that they knew how the protocol worked, and they just did an efficient exit. Because you could say that Malt is a stable coin pegged to the dollar, so it doesn't matter what the swing trader does. If the swing trader waits 6 years before it steps in, the whale could theoretically just wait 6 years and sell when it regains peg again. So selling at peg is not a problem. That's not an exploit. That's actually what the protocol is supposed to do. It recovered peg, and the whale used that, the fact that the peg was recovered to get an efficient exit. That was fine. However, it shouldn't be as easy as it was, and that was the problem. So what we've been working on. So originally we were kind of working on some ideas, and we kind of built out some stuff, and as we were thinking about this, we realized that there's actually a lot more that we can do to improve the way that the swing trader specifically operates, in a way, and this kind of ties into another thought that I've had since V1, to be honest, but I didn't know how to reconcile it. And the issue was that there was never a guaranteed price floor on Malt. I'd never liked that. I always wanted to build in some mechanism where there was a defined price floor, where we could make a guarantee that the price will never fall below its intrinsic value, or at least not over any length of time. Maybe momentarily it gets slipped down below, but that value will, the intrinsic value of the implied collateral will always maintain itself indefinitely as a worst case. That felt like a really nice thing to have, a very well-defined price floor, but we never had that. And I toyed with ideas of doing like a mint redeem when we get down to implied collateral, but it never felt clean, it never felt elegant, and we never did it. And that was always a psychological burden on me for V1 for sure, and even through V2. While the protocol was working well, given the backdrop, and we had at the time 74% implied collateral, and I was worried that we could see a bank run because of the fear around stablecoins, and the 74% wouldn't have been enough, and we would have just tanked, and the price floor is zero at that point, because it is possible for the swing trader to just get depleted, and we kind of saw that. So that was kind of, for context, that was in the back of my mind. I always wanted to create a system that could provide a guaranteed price floor. So that's what we ended up doing, and we've actually managed to do it. We've come up with a mechanism where the swing trader and the auctions both still exist, and that was another thing that we toyed with, is removing the auctions entirely and putting all auction funds into the swing trader. And yeah, VLP, V2 swing trader, exit facilitator, yes, but that's also kind of the point, because it was, it's a dollar pegged stablecoin. So when the price of a dollar pegged stablecoin goes back to $1, you can always exit at $1. And if it didn't recover, so if we didn't facilitate that exit, that means the stablecoin's not working. So there's that. But the nuances I'm kind of getting into is a lot more complicated than that. It's not just that a whale's able to sell at $1 and then wait for the price to recover. It's about how they can do that. How quickly is that happening, and what's the kind of ramifications, and the fact that a whale is selling and then the price recovers and then they sell again and then the price recovers and they sell again, there's a fundamental economic mismatch in the supply and demand there that the protocol wasn't aware of. And that was the problem. It's not the problem that they were able to sell at $1, it's that the protocol wasn't smart enough to understand that there was a drastic mismatch in supply and demand, and every time peg is recovered, it's just tanking again. That's the problem. The lack of that awareness was the problem. And so that's what we've been thinking about. So we iterated on a lot of stuff, and this is why it's kind of taken us so long to get to the point that we're at, where we were going to delete the auctions entirely and say, well, the problem was that by the time it gets to auctions, all the implied collateral was depleted, and now we're asking the community to step in, and that just seems bad, because that's the moment of most psychological despair, and that's the point that we're asking everybody to help. So I didn't like that. So we're just going to remove auctions, have it all be just a swing trader effectively, and that would have so much more capital, and then we would just try to optimize that. But then that struggles to then provide a price floor, because unless the swing trader has 100% collateral, it cannot make any price floor guarantees. So then we started going back and forth and iterating, changing things, ripping things out, adding them back in. You know how it goes. But where we've landed is we still have swing trader, we've still got auctions. One big difference, well, there's many, but one big difference is now the order is different. So the auctions can actually trigger immediately, kind of like V1, and the swing trader has an internal parameter that defines at what price it will step in. So in V2, it would step in as soon as the price depegged. So effectively it would step in immediately, and there was a bit of a time delay thing in V2, but it didn't work that well. But now what we've got in this new kind of upcoming V3, I guess, is a price curve. It's an exponential decay curve that goes from peg down to just under the implied collateral. And that exponential decay curve defines the price at which the swing trader will decide to step in. So initially, when that decay curve is at peg, then the swing trader just steps in immediately. That's the functionality that we saw in V2. But then what's happening as the swing trader steps in is it's starting to accumulate malt, because it starts off, like, let's say hypothetically, it starts off with a 10 million die, and then it's just used 100k die to buy back some malt, and now maybe it has 120,000 malt and 9.9 million die. So as a ratio of its total funds, we don't include the malt in terms of the implied collateral. That's the malt that the swing trader holds is considered burned as far as the implied collateral is concerned. But for the sake of this exponential curve, we do look at that now, because that's the heuristic for the supply-demand mismatch that I mentioned earlier. When the swing trader is starting to accumulate malt because it's starting to buy, then its die is depleting and the malt that it holds is going up. So we define this exponential decay curve as a function of the malt value as a ratio of the total capital in the swing trader. And by doing that, we create this dynamic behavior where if the market starts to get shaky and like we saw in V2 where this whale is selling, then as the swing trader is accumulating that malt, every subsequent buy that it has to make will be made at a lower price as defined by this exponential decay, where eventually the decay curve will drop underneath implied collateral. And that is where the guaranteed price floor comes in, because if the swing trader will never purchase below the implied collateral, or never above the implied collateral ratio, i.e. the price that defines when the swing trader will purchase is actually at a lower price than the current implied collateral, that means we can guarantee that implied collateral level indefinitely. Because if the implied collateral is at 80 cents and the swing trader's only ever buying at 75 cents, then it's going to bring it back up to 80 cents at that point. When it goes below, it will bring it back up to that level of 80 cents. So all it's doing is increasing the implied collateral, because now it's spending maybe an average execution price of 78 cents to buy something that it can afford to spend 80 cents on. So there's 2 cents that's being kind of won back, so to speak. And in doing so, it's slightly increasing the implied collateral available. So we can indefinitely guarantee that price floor. So that wins back that feature, or not wins back, it enables the price floor guarantee, which is something I've always wanted, and I'm incredibly excited that we finally have that. But then the other thing that happens there is, because the swing trader doesn't step in immediately, there's some distance between the peg price and the price at which the swing trader will execute. So let's say the peg is $1 and the swing trader's entry, as defined by this exponential decay curve, is 85 cents, let's say. Now, if the price of the market is at 93 cents, then the swing trader is not going to step in yet, because it's not low enough. So at that point, the price is just floating. And that's where the auctions happen now. And so that means that if you're a community member and you believe that Malt's going to regain peg, you can start buying ARB tokens and be rewarded with this ARB premium that we've seen before, with the difference that you are no longer the last line of defense. You know that the swing trader is going to step in behind you if the price continues to fall. So 2 things can happen to you at this point. You purchase the ARB tokens at 93 cents or whatever, and maybe you get like a 20% premium, let's say. So functionally you ended up paying like 85 cents for it or whatever. And then the auction works and we get back to peg, and then business as usual, in which case you can just redeem your ARB tokens and make your profit and move on, which is great. Or the price can drop from your entry, in which case the swing trader will enter eventually when the price drops below its execution price. And in the absolute worst case, the swing trader steps in, brings it back to peg, but then we drop off again. Then the subsequent swing trader purchase will be even lower, until eventually it gets down to the price floor. So the risk profile of ARB tokens has changed dramatically. It's no longer price floor of 0. So if you purchase ARB tokens at an average price of 85 cents and the implied collateral is 80 cents, then your maximum risk per ARB token is 5 cents. So you have that well-defined risk. You've also got the ability still to exit early, just as we had in V2. Unfortunately, never got to see that, but it was there. So that's changing as well. And then, so that's kind of like drastically changing the entire risk profile of the auctions, psychologically and just like empirically in the way the risk actually functions if you were to model it. So it's psychologically much easier to want to participate knowing that the swing trader's behind you and there's a defined price floor. And additional to that, it just is actually a quantitatively lesser risk than it was before. And now we have this the price floor as well. So I think that whole thing just feels like, to me, the maturation, I guess, of the protocol. Like if we look at the way that Malt has evolved over the last like 18 months or however long it's been, it's started off with V1, which was in retrospect an incredibly crude implementation of what is probably a good idea. But the having no collateral, or functionally no collateral, just a little bit of liquidity extension, and then expecting the auctions to just work, that was naive, and obviously it didn't, and then the bugs as well. But I think the bugs were actually, it was a fortunate thing for us that happened, because we were able to shut down what was a suboptimal mechanic and try again. And then V2 come along, and V2 was far superior to V1 with the addition of the swing trader, a lot more implied collateral, or the concept of implied collateral even existing, and that felt better. But there was still, as we discovered, like things that just weren't quite right. And now we've got the price floor guarantee, the additional like risk benefit of the auctions, and we will also be a lot more conservative with the APRs within V3, with the express purpose of ensuring that we get to 100% implied collateral as quickly as possible, because at that point we can guarantee the price of $1, and we can just start like building out utility without having to worry about a depeg in any significant way, because the landscape of stablecoins has changed drastically since the advent of V1. Like when V1 started, it was kind of off the tail end of like algo stable seasons, and we had all these coins like ESD, DSD, Basis, Mithril, whatever other number of algo stables that existed in those days, and it was kind of normal to just see stupidly high APRs trying to bootstrap a mechanism that could hopefully sustain itself, and that was obviously, it's been proven wrong. That model is wrong. And then with UST collapsing, there's a lot more apprehension around the word algorithmic within stablecoins, and I think we're kind of moving away from that wording as well, because we don't necessarily see ourselves as an algorithmic stablecoin anymore, even though, like, strictly speaking, by the definition of that we are. But we look at ourselves right now, and the kind of core focus that we have right now is more towards the democratization of arbitrage and kind of MEV on the stablecoin. Because you look at every other stablecoin in existence, not even just crypto stablecoins, but just general, like anything that's holding a value, relies on arbitrage. Like the fact that Bitcoin trades at the same price on FTX as it does on Binance, it's not because Binance and FTX are kind of DMing each other and saying, hey bro, change the price a little bit here, I've just tanked and like whatever. It's because there's arbitrage running across all of these exchanges all the time, and nobody ever really thinks, well, how much money is being extracted by that arbitrage? And for a stablecoin, the arbitrage is not just like there, it's critical. It's the most important thing that happens on any stablecoin. Look at Frax, USDC, USDT, DAI, they all rely to some degree on arbitrage, and that's just an untapped amount of money that's just going away to these bots. So where we're looking towards now is, how do we try to capture as much of that? I don't think it's possible to capture it all, because there's always going to be adversarial situations on chain where somebody can exploit a kind of a mechanistic thing to make a little bit of profit. But how do we make sure that 90% of the profit isn't going to bots? And maybe if we can get to 40-50% of that profit going to RLPs, that would be phenomenal. And that's a source of yield that's untapped, relatively speaking. We're starting to see more and more projects coming out now that are trying to do this thing. But I think we have an advantage in that we've been thinking about this for a bit longer, potentially, than some of these newer projects. But that seems to be the direction for us, that we're algorithmically collateralized, I guess, in that we have a swing trader that's profiting. But really, it's the arbitrage piece that's the important part about the Malt mechanism, not so much that it's algorithmic, because in its ideal steady state, Malt is fully collateralized. So it functions with all the guarantees that a fully collateralized coin has. It's just the mechanism of the collateralization is algorithmic, instead of being a mint and redeem that many other stablecoins use. And that mint and redeem means that the arbitrageurs are the ones who are doing the mint redeem, and they're making the profit. So the mint redeem facilitates the bots to make the profit, and the externality of that profit is that the stablecoin remains stable. What we're trying to do is let's take that profit and actually make it for ourselves so that we can give it to LPs and still get the benefit of the stability. So we have all of the upside of fully collateralized with this additional source of yield for LPs, and like that provides a sustainable source, theoretically, indefinitely, if the coin's being used. Because arbitrage doesn't go away. It's not like, oh, when Malt reaches scale and has a ton of utility, there'll be no arbitrage. It's like, well, actually, it's quite the opposite. When there's more and more usage of the coin, the arbitrage opportunity goes up. So that's a really interesting thing, where as the utility of Malt goes up, as the usage of Malt goes up, so does the opportunity for arbitrage, and that arbitrage is the source of yield for LPs. Meaning there is a literal direct value capture. It's not like, oh, well, we kind of do this thing and maybe we burn some coins or buy back some coins, and there's an indirect value capture to the token holders of the governance token that's also kind of like tenuous in why it exists. Malt has a direct value capture. Like, the increased demand increases the price movement of the coin, we arbitrage that away and we give that to LPs. It's a direct value capture. So the more that Malt scales, the more utility that Malt has, the higher the runway and the LP yield will become. That seems like a very compelling thing to do. So that's what we're working towards. But where we're at right now is we're in the final stages of putting the kind of tests together for the new swing trader mechanism, and then there's another piece actually to mention that I haven't really touched upon, which is that if things get really bad, in that there's a drastic increase or a drastic imbalance between supply and demand, mostly on the supply side. So when the price starts to drop, obviously I've mentioned this exponential decay curve that the swing trader will use. There'll also be another decay curve for the internal auction participation, which is the auction participation on behalf of LPs. There's another curve that does that. And then there's a final curve which defines the kind of the peg price that's the target. Because when the price, if the swing trader is always bringing it back to $1, even if it's buying under peg, it bringing it back to peg might result in the actual execution price being above the implied collateral, even though the purchase was triggered below. So the price that the swing trader will actually bring it back to won't always be $1. It will follow another curve. So it will drop off. But that curve is not an exponential drop off, it's just a linear drop off. So then there's this kind of three curves where the highest one is the peg return price, I guess, and then the lowest is the swing trader, and in between is the auction. And I know this is hard to understand in words, but there'll be some articles, docs, white paper, whatever, before we launch, so people can kind of wrap their mind around how this stuff works, because it is somewhat of a tricky thing to really wrap your mind around. It has some math involved, which gets scary sometimes, but I think everybody will be able to wrap their mind around how this works. And then what that does is then controls the actual execution price that the swing trader gets, which is a lot more sophisticated than the way we saw it in V2, where the swing trader just steps in, sends it back to $1, and calls it a day, and has no real control over what the actual final execution price is. But that's actually really important to know and to control, because if the execution price is too far above the implied collateral, then it's just depleting itself away. If I make the statement that I've got 50 cents for every malt that exists, but I'm paying 80 cents back to people to buy back their malt, I'm going to run out eventually, and there's still going to be malt in existence. So then we've depleted all of the collateral and we're done. And obviously at that point, the price collapses to zero. But if I say I've got 80 cents, but I'm only ever buying it at 70 cents, then I can buy the entire supply back, and I would still have money left over at the end. So we want to be able to finally control that execution price so that we can make some guarantees about never running out of money, which means that in the worst case, we drop from $1, find a price floor at implied collateral, and then we will slowly, over time, drift back up to peg, just by the function that when we're below and the swing trader's purchasing at less than its intrinsic value, that's slightly increasing the price floor, and then we'll also start to sell below peg. The swing trader will sell below peg as long as its execution on the sell is above where its own cost basis. So again, if it bought it for 55 cents and it's selling it for 60, then again it's increasing its implied collateral. So every little micro action like that over time slowly drifts that price floor back to peg, and when we get there, we're there but with force, because we're 100% collateralized at that point. So there's two possible trajectories that we go on. One is that we launch and things just go really well, and we get to 100% implied collateral really quickly, and we just like steady state, chill, and kind of hang out at $1 at 100% implied collateral with like some modest yield, and everything's good. Or we grow quickly, but the implied collateral doesn't keep up, in which case maybe there comes a shock event where a big whale exits or something like that, and we drop. But then we'll drop down to the implied collateral level, which, given that we're going to be more conservative, I could gonna hazard a guess it's going to be more than 74%, because that's where we got to with the kind of aggressive internal parameters that we had in V2. So if we're a lot more conservative than that, presumably we're going to have a more than that. So let's say it's 85 cents on the dollar that we have in collateral. So then in that shock event case, we drop down to 85 cents, and then over time people use it, and we slowly start to drift back up to $1, in which case we're good. But in either way, we have a defined price floor, the risk is well defined, and if we depeg, there's actually a rigorously defined path back to peg that isn't just a Hail Mary, which is kind of what Malt would have had to rely on to a degree in the previous versions, and many other stablecoins have also relied on that aren't, if they're not fully collateralized. If the depeg happens, they're done. There's not been many examples of an under-collateralized coin depegging and recovering peg. I can't think of one off the top of my head, to be honest. So let's just assume that the empirical evidence states that that's not possible. So that's what we're trying to like wrangle with this system. That we're trying to provide that price floor and then give it a dynamic such that it can raise the price floor over time. That's kind of it. I guess that's a very fast rundown of everything that is to come, or has already been built, or is in the process of being validated. So we should have testnets out soon. I'm hoping, like if you were to press me, I would hope that we'd launch sometime in Q4. But obviously we're going to need to get things audited. We're going to have to get a lot of testnets done and stuff like that. We're in talks with some security DAOs, as well as other like just fairly typical auditing firms. We've spoken with the Pwned No More DAO, which is an incredibly stacked roster of very, very smart security researchers, and they've just recently formed a DAO around their expertise, and they're going to offer audits plus automated code review with this kind of fuzzing infrastructure that they've built out. And if you want to check those out, at their website, you can see the roster of security researchers that they have is incredible. They've got a couple CTF winners at DEF CON, which is, for anybody who knows anything about kind of security and hacking and stuff, like the DEF CON CTF is it's a pretty big deal, and to have multiple winners within their roster is pretty impressive. So we're really focusing on making sure that we're as secure as possible. Obviously we had the audit before V2, and we're going to have an audit now, but we want to not just have an audit and rest on a laurel saying this is good. We want an ongoing relationship with security researchers and teams so that we can continue to look for issues, and we'll also roll out a bug bounty program once we have the capital to do so. And so that's kind of where we're at now, but I'll turn it over to all of you now, and if you've got any questions or want me to elaborate on anything, or just want to chat, I guess, you can feel free. quite quiet. So I guess not, but I mean, I can keep rambling if people want. I'm quite good at that, as it seems. Maybe talk about some of the stuff that's been happening in crypto. It's been quite slow given it's a bear market, but there's still lots going on. Like the Fay situation is quite a big talking point for stablecoins at the minute, and yeah, there's all sorts of other stuff going on. Have you considered a different launch mechanism besides just adding liquidity for people to ape? Yes, I would love to do something different. Just speaking from the kind of the team's perspective, doing the kind of whitelist thing is hard work. Like I really don't envy KRN's job through V2, where he was having to keep track of everybody who had whitelist and running all those contests and stuff. That was quite tricky. And yeah, so I'd rather avoid doing that if possible. Ultimately, we need liquidity to start, but there may be other ways to do that better than how we've done it with the whitelists before. And yeah, if anybody's got suggestions on how they think we could do it better, I'm more than happy to listen, because yeah, it's difficult to do it well and fairly, especially with the complexity of like how it's gone, like the trajectory of Malt thus far, where we've launched twice, and like obviously with V1 it was just kind of who knew about it. Okay, you're on the whitelist, good, well done. V2, we wanted to make sure that we honored our agreement with the people who'd lost money in V1, but also giving opportunity to those who didn't lose but were wanting to come back for V2. And now it's like, well, if we did that again, now we'd have to honor V2 people, and what do we do about V1 people? And it gets all complicated. And then, but we also want to be fair to the new people who come in. We don't want to say, well, if you knew about us before, you're in, and if you didn't, tough. So then how do we offer opportunities for new people to find us in a fair way that isn't just like, let's do random giveaways, because that's hard to manage and scale. So yeah, it's fairly tricky. I'm not sure I have good answers for you right now, but if anybody's got better ideas, we're more than willing to listen. Tell us anything about the time plan. Yeah, we're kind of aiming for Q4, I guess, for launch. So the code is, I'd say, mostly done, 90 to 95% done at this point. Then there's some internal stuff that we want to handle well before then, things like just making sure that we're like legally airtight, which was something that we hadn't really delved into too much for V1 because it was kind of a hobby thing. V2 we had a little bit, but wasn't really well structured. And I think now with the landscape around stablecoins and the regulatory landscape just around crypto generally, with like Tornado Cash and things like that happening, I don't want to take any risks. I don't want to end up getting into trouble even retroactively just because we didn't have like a good advice or something. So we want to make sure that we kind of cross the I's and dot the T's on that front. But other than that, the code's nearly done. So the only thing bottlenecking the project itself is going to be testnets and audits, making sure that we're airtight on that, and then we can launch at any time. Updated docs will be ready earlier than that, yeah, for sure. Probably actually write like a proper white paper this time, so we'll have docs like we've always had, that are kind of more kind of for the layman and just like explaining how things work, and we'll probably put together a more rigorous white paper because there is actually a little more going on now. There's a bit more math and a bit more theory going on behind the scenes this time, so I think having a proper white paper would also be beneficial. So if V3 swing trader will be trading around implied collateral, will there still be scenarios where a competing trader will be able to drain it, front-running swing trader sells over IC before the swing trader oracle is updated. I'm sure there's edge cases there that could be exploited to a degree, but I would be hesitant to say that it would be able to drain the swing trader, just because of... So there is actually kind of one open question related to that that's still unanswered, I guess, within Malt, which is what we do about the turning off buying within this new scheme. So in V2 it's fairly simplistic, we just turned off buying below peg. With this new system, that's not going to be feasible in the exact same way, just because the under peg behavior is a lot more complex, and just turning it off is just taking a sledgehammer to like something small. I don't know. So yeah, I don't want to say that we're airtight, because that would be disingenuous of me to say that it's absolutely zero chance that anybody could drain the swing trader or even exploit it to any degree. But I think we're a lot tighter than we have been up till now, and I'm fairly confident that that's not going to be a problem. But we will, throughout a testnet, we will try to create some like agent-based simulation stuff as well to aggressively attempt to exploit the behavior of the swing trader, because that's going to be the biggest vulnerable site this time. So we definitely want to make sure that we're being as rigorous as we can to make sure that that's going to work in the way that we expect, because there's a lot of complexity and trade-offs that you have to make. So we could, for example, use very up-to-date oracles as fast as possible, which is really reading directly from the pool. Problem with that is that's incredibly exploitable, because the pool can be manipulated, and there's just a lot that can happen there. So you could make the oracle really slow, which makes it really much harder to manipulate the oracle, but that means that there's scope to manipulate in the discrepancy between the real price and the oracle, and in that little discrepancy there's a lot of room to maneuver for bots to potentially exploit. So I don't think it's actually possible to be 100% airtight there. There's going to be some level of exploitation where some smart people can pull some money out of the system. That's inevitable. But what needs to happen, and like the rigor that behind all of this has to be such that none of that behavior blows out exponentially and converges to infinity, right? Like in a sense where that means that the swing trader gets drained. Like the convergence point of that behavior has to be finite. And if it's finite, then we can control it. And ideally have it like structured such that it never creates an existential risk to the protocol. It's just an externality that exists, that's a very tough battle, I'm not going to lie, but that's what we're doing. That's the fight we've chosen to fight, and we're going to have to do our best to try and get there as well as we can. So regarding liquidity for V3, it could be an idea to use a Google form as an interest check with questions like how much would you be willing to invest, for example, whether you're new, have you been a user of V1, V2. I guess that way you could give some genuine interest from both new and former users. Yeah, that's it's a fairly good idea, I think, to gauge interest, and that would help us figure out like how much allocation to give. And yeah, the only potential downside to that is it's not very Sybil resistant. Anybody could just submit thousands of addresses and say I'll put $1,000 in. But we don't have to, obviously we don't have to use that list as the be all and end all. We can use that list to gauge sentiment. Obviously we can verify if somebody was part of V1 or V2, that's easy, so we could do that. That would be a good way to gauge temperature for the people who've already been there and get a very rough idea of the new people that want to be involved as well. Understanding the value of the autonomous protocol, would it be possible to maintain a kill switch if we observe the swing trader is suddenly getting his ass kicked? Was a long painful night for us to all watch V2 swing trader get TK'd. Yeah, I mean we did have a kill switch which we ultimately did enact, within V2, but not so much. Too little, too late for the swing trader, I guess, because it was already depleted by that point. I think the whole premise behind the V2 or the V3 mechanism is that shouldn't happen, because every subsequent purchase of the swing trader makes will be at a lower and lower price until eventually it's under its implied collateral. So it would never really get its ass kicked in the same way, because it's as the price drops from $1 to 98, it's going to buy, but then the next time it's only going to buy at 94 and then 90 and so on and so forth, until it's only purchasing below its implied collateral and only bringing it back to implied collateral. So I think that's a lot more dynamic in its behavior, so it's not likely that it's just going to get its ass kicked. But with that said, there could still be issues, right? So there probably will still be a kill switch, but hopefully we won't ever have to use it. And then, because I don't like having the kill switch there, to be honest. V1 didn't have one. I added it in V2. I didn't add it in V1 because we were a nobody team. Nobody knew who we were. We had no credentials in the space. So for all intents and purposes, we could have been a rug. And I think adding a kill switch to a project that's by a team that's not known is that's just rug central. It just didn't look. It wasn't a good look. So we didn't add it. And that kind of bit us in V1. But I would make the same choice again, happily, in fact, because it's just how it was. That was the necessary evil, and it didn't work out that time. We added the kill switch into V2 because we figured that we had a little more trust. Like, if we were going to rug, we wouldn't be building a V2. We would have walked away with the 13 million that we could have walked away with in V1. But we didn't walk away with that, so hopefully that in and of itself bought us some trust that we weren't going to just rug. So we added the kill switch. And we got rewarded for that in that we were able to shut down the protocol when it was obvious that the market conditions and the protocol wasn't good enough. So that helped us in V2. But in principle, I still don't like having it, because I shouldn't, or the team shouldn't, have the control to just shut it down, necessarily. I think and that this comes into a much larger debate about centralization versus decentralization, and like, I'm as hardcore for decentralization as the next guy, but pragmatically, there has to be centralization at somewhere along the stack if you're ever going to build something good. It's just not possible. And functionally, you're trusting the team. If you're purchasing the protocol, you're trusting the team to have written the code right anyway. It's not like everyone is like sifting through the code and verifying it themselves. Like, most people aren't doing that. You're just trusting that, oh, they've got an audit, and I've heard the guys talk, and they seem like they've got their head screwed on, and there's a judgment call there. But you're still trusting us to a degree, to have done it right. And so where do you place that trust? And I think the point of decentralization is not trust minimization to zero in all cases. Decentralization is all about knowing where the implicit trust is. That's way more important. Like, when you're in a bank, when you deposit your money into a bank, who are you trusting? You don't know. I mean, you could say you're trusting the bank, so that seems fairly obvious. But then, who's the bank trusting? Like, what third parties are they handing off to? Who's got access to the data? Like, we don't know that, and that's where all the implicit trust exists. And really, decentralization and blockchain and the kind of the radical transparency that we're striving for in this space is not about let's diminish trust to zero. It's about let's diminish implicit trust to zero. We do not want to have any third party that we're not aware of that we have to trust and we don't even know they exist. That's bad. Trusting the developers of a protocol to a degree, and that's not to say that we should have like all of our money in a single wallet that's like not multi-sig and it's just like on my phone, right? Obviously that's bad. You want better structures than that, but there has to be some level of trust somewhere in the stack. As long as you know where that is and you're willing to take that risk to make that trust, then that's fine. If you're not willing to trust me and the team, then that's absolutely fine. That's your prerogative to do that, and I wouldn't want to force you to make a different decision. But if you are, then you've got to trust that we're going to write the code, and that in some cases means that we have to write a kill switch in there to try and help. And there are many people criticized us for using the kill switch in V2. I think that's a fair criticism. I might criticize that as well. But given the choices or the information that I had, I think, and even in retrospect, I think we made a good decision, because I don't see any way that V2 continues, given that the swing trader had already been depleted, so there was obviously mechanistic issues there, and nobody wanted to hold a stablecoin, an algorithmic stablecoin, on that particular day in the subsequent week, because that we saw UST aggressively depegging. So I think Malt goes to zero if we hadn't hit the kill switch, and maybe some people get out a profit, but the people that really suffer in that situation are the people who believed in us, the people who really trusted us and are like, I'm not going to sell because these boys are going to recover it. They got wrecked. And that would have weighed on me if I'd have said, well, who got away? Well, the people who didn't believe in us and just opportunistically left, they made money, and all the people who really believed in us and stood behind us, they all got wrecked. That seems bad. So I made the judgment call to cut it early and try repay everybody as much as we could. And there were some people who lost money because they bought Malt above peg, and we only redeemed at peg. But beyond those kind of issues, we redeemed the 100% at face value. We were 100k short. We covered that ourselves. So I think in terms of like the implicit trust, we did a good job on that one. In my opinion, maybe people disagree, but there we go. Will there still be manual auctions for the retail as a mechanism? The whole design is now final. Yes, there will be auctions still. But instead, so in V2, there was a cascade that ended in the auction. So the swing trader stepped in. If the swing trader ran out of money, then it was the internal auction. And if that ran out of money, it was the overflow. And if that ran out of money, then we went to auctions. So once all of the internal resources were depleted, we asked you good people to step in and help us. That is bad, I think, in retrospect, to ask at the point of least confidence, to ask the community to get involved. It's really lambs to the slaughter at that point, to a degree. So the V3 mechanism is different in that the auctions trigger in what I kind of affectionately call no man's land, in between the peg target and the swing trader entry. So if the swing trader entry price is defined by this exponential decay curve, and at this point in time, let's say that entry price is 85 cents and the peg price is $1, so anywhere in between $1 and 85 cents, that's where auctions will exist, which allows auction participants to know that they're being defended by the swing trader coming in after them, because the auction might recover the peg, and then that's great, and you can just redeem your ARB tokens and move on with your life. And if that doesn't work and the auctions isn't strong enough to recover peg, then we continue to drop, but then that's where the swing trader steps in. And I think that psychologically is very good, to know that the swing trader is waiting in the wings behind the auction. So then, if you're quick, you could buy ARB tokens in 90 cents, say, then the price continues to drop to 85, and then the swing trader steps in and brings the price back up to $1, and you could early exit at $1 and make a little bit of profit, and that would be absolutely fine for you to do. And that's because you maybe expect the price to continue to tank after the regain of peg, but the dynamic of the auction is just a lot safer than it's ever been, I think, even though it still exists. It exists in a much more mature fashion. I'm not sure if you can all hear the bells in the background, but they're making a lot of noise, so maybe I'll mute myself for a bit and you can ask some questions and I'll come back when they stop. Fairly typical, isn't it? As soon as I don't do any public talking for months, and then the one day I do it is the day that all the bells in the world decide to ring for me. Great. That's a good question about the volatility around PEG.
Potentially, yes. I think the true answer to that question is going to be
very closely tied to what we do about the turning off purchasing under PEG, because that dynamic is crude and has to be updated to the more mature protocol, and we haven't fully ironed out how that's going to work. So however that works, it will really have an impact on how much the volatility is going to increase or decrease around PEG, given this new kind of no man's land situation. So if we do, in the example previously where the swing trader is going to step in at 85 cents and the no man's land, so to speak, is between 85 and $1, so that at that point when we drop to 97 cents it triggers an auction. And obviously at that point, like, it's still possible for everybody who doesn't want to be in the protocol to sell and outweigh the auctions and continue dropping the price. So that might like drop the price quickly because people are expecting a depeg and it's panic stations, and the price drops, and then the auction, maybe there's people bullish and they buy, so then in that case the volatility does increase around that in that no man's land area. But I think with this system there's actually less urgency to the auctions, where in the previous iterations of the protocol there was a lot more urgency. V1 had like a profound amount of urgency to the auctions because it's all we had. V2, there was also a lot of urgency around auctions because they were the final line of defense. And I think that was part of the problem, that there was so much heightened alertness around the auctions because it's like, shit, we're going into an auction. It was like a big deal. And it's like, oh wow, this is like actually kind of a problem. What's going to happen? People start getting emotional, start panicking. Where the urgency is way less now because the swing trader hasn't even stepped in yet. It's still going to come. We've just depegged because it's a stable coin. Sometimes people sell. Maybe they wanted to buy some ETH and they used their malt to buy some ETH, and then there we go. The price is now of malt has dropped a little bit. If that was a trade for large size. So that's going to happen, and that happens for all other stablecoins that exist. But when they're mint redeem, they can aggressively recover PEG. And if we're at 100% implied collateral, we can also aggressively recover PEG in the same way, because the exponential decay curve and the no man's land and all that stuff goes to zero, because implied collateral is $1, and as soon as the price drops below whatever the exponential decay curve is, we're going to be below it because the implied collateral is 100%. So then at that point we function perfectly fine. So what we're talking about is when the implied collateral is actually lower than $1. So we're not fully backed. And when we're not fully backed, I don't think it's reasonable to necessarily expect the price to recover immediately. And that was a problem that we saw in V2 because the swing trader did try to recover it immediately. So I think we go for more of like an eventual consistency, to use like kind of tech nomenclature, with PEG, that we try to build, like, there's less urgency to recover the PEG. Obviously we want to, but we don't have to do it right now. So the auction can happen and people can make a judgment call that isn't emotional, where they're like, okay, the price has just dropped to 97 cents. Do I want to help right now, or do I want to step in later? And that's a fine choice to make, because maybe people see there's still a bunch of whales that have just withdrawn LP, so they're probably going to sell it. So we're not going to step in now. So to some degree, there's a market-driven effect to how the capital gets deployed. So then there's this adversarial situation where is the whale going to accept selling at 97, or are they going to wait? And the community who's willing to buy the auction tokens are also having that choice. Am I going to wait for that whale to sell and enter the auction then? And maybe there's a succession of auctions that just start up and then the time elapses and then a new auction starts and there's no participation. And that's actually fine. In this system, that's absolutely fine. People just step in whenever they think the time is right, and if the price does get below that swing trader auction price or the swing trader entry price, then the swing trader will step in. And there may or may not have been any auction participation in the meantime. So there's a lot more of a kind of market dynamic in that, which I always like. I like all systems to be driven by markets, because markets kind of understand nuances way better than any individual ever could. So making it as much market driven as possible is always better in my mind. So I think there's that element too. So maybe volatility on the downside decrease or increases as people panic and they start selling, and because of the auction, which would have usually propped it up a little bit, but it's that propping up doesn't exist anymore because people aren't buying it and the swing trader's not buying it, so all that's happening is people are selling, so downside volatility increases. But that's actually kind of good, because the more we see downside volatility, or then the sooner we're going to get closer to implied collateral, which allows the protocol to recover without wasting as much capital. And that's really what we need to get to the bottom of, and what we saw in V2, we were wasting capital. V1 we wasted capital, V2 we wasted capital, maybe not quite as quickly, but we still wasted capital. V3, hopefully, this system with this exponential decay curve, with the auctions, this market-driven dynamic, is going to be a lot stronger, and we're going to waste way less capital, but still have the same kind of price discovery, and the ability to even out the discrepancies in supply and demand much faster and more elegantly than we ever have before, with the benefit of saying that if there's a massive discrepancy in supply and demand, and the supply is grossly outweighing the demand, then we can provide a guaranteed price floor at implied collateral with a dynamic behavior where the swing trader will just arb itself around the implied collateral and just progressively start to bolster its own collateral up, which is increasing the price floor, and eventually we get back to peg. And that's really the epitome of the Malt ethos right now, is how do we maximize the democratization of arbitrage, which is, I think, the point you're making right here at the end. Sounds like Malt will be the epitome of arb, and that's what we're hoping for. Is it going to be perfect? Absolutely not. There's still a lot we can do to improve, but the kind of metric for us is every iteration that we're working on better than the last, and so far so good on that front. I would say V1 was a decent idea, crude execution. V2 was a much better execution, but still had some issues, and the at least the theory behind V3 is a lot stronger than V2. Obviously time will tell how the implementation will come along when we run it in test nets and run kind of agent-based simulations, stuff like that. But we're moving forward. There's a progress to what we're doing, maybe not as fast as some would hope, including myself, but we're still making progress. So still only on Polygon, and then fast expand to other L2s. Yeah, that's still the plan. As I said this before V2, Polygon is not my favorite chain. If I had a choice, I would probably go somewhere else. I say that as if I don't have a choice. I obviously do have a choice, but I think just for the consistency, it's better to stay on Polygon until we really iron it out. Because Polygon's okay. It's not like fees are pretty good. It's got some things on there. It's got platforms like Uniswap and Aave on there. So it's like a fairly mature DeFi ecosystem. So it's not a terrible place to be. And once we've ironed out, because we're still very much in an R&D phase right now, and then the kind of next step after R&D is the expansion, and that will happen very quickly once we get there. So we have a Malt DAI pool, and then we'll probably roll out some other stable pools, maybe Malt Frax, Malt USDC, or whatever other people want, stable pools. Then we roll out some non-stable pools, Malt ETH, Malt Wrap Bitcoin, Malt Matic, Malt whatever else, Aave, Uni, whatever else people want. And that's, once we've got that, we've got the backbone of a really strong stablecoin. We can go send it from there, really. We can bridge it to any other chain, and we'll start rolling it out and really aggressively chase scale. At that point, we'll go after integrations, partnerships, and just try to get Malt into as many places as possible. But if we try to do that too early, we'll die. We have to be able to prove that we're a stable coin. We can't just say we're a stable coin and hope it'll be stable and just aggressively try to scale it out, because if that happens and we depeg, we lose all market confidence in everything that we're doing, and we can't recover from that. Well, right now we're still small. The amount of people that know about Malt is still relatively small. It started off as just being the kind of the algo stable people that knew about it. Maybe after what's happened with malt in the previous 2 iterations, maybe more people know about malt, but the people who actually participate in it is not a lot. So from that perspective, we like that we're staying small so that we can iterate on that. So when we do unfortunately have kind of failures along the way, we're not failing at scale. We're failing small. Obviously in dollar terms, the amount of the values we're talking about are not small, but in terms of users and size relative to what we could be, it's still small. So we're making small mistakes and small failures until we really nail it down, and the stablecoin's working with stable pools, non-stable pools, providing a good yield, and we can build out whatever other stuff we want. And we've got many ideas of internal stuff that we want to build, as well as partnerships that we want to roll out. And then once we've got that and it's really nailed down, it's working on Polygon, then it's everywhere, and it's integrations and it's partnerships, and it's going after the holy grail of scaling up a stablecoin that's crypto native and decentralized. And that would be phenomenal for us, and that's really the end goal, because we do think that we have a strong edge in what we're going after. The democratization of arbitrage is a strong edge over every other stablecoin that exists right now. They all have to chase. Like, I use Frax as an example because I love Frax. I love Sam, I love Frax, I love everything that they're doing. I think they're an incredibly smart team, and the execution is phenomenal. But they don't really have a native form of yield on their stablecoin. The bots make money trying to keep the coin stable with the arbitrage, so they're making good money, and they're happy about that. But the native LPs, the only way that Frax can really make good yield for their LPs is to get involved in the curve wars and bribe convex holders and things like that. And Frax spend a ton of money every week bribing convex holders to incentivize liquidity in curve for Frax. And that kind of really puts their destiny in the hands of another project, and that's kind of scary as a founder. What happens if there's a massive exploit of convex or curve? Not that that's necessarily likely, but it's not zero possibility. And there's any number of other things that can happen. And if any of those do, then there's a potential for Frax to really suffer for something that happened to another project. And then they're going to have to really work hard to build themselves back up and find a new source of yield for their LPs, which means most of their energy is spent trying to incentivize LPs forever. Malt won't have that problem because we have it intrinsically baked into the protocol that we have a source of yield for our LPs that will never go away if we do our job right. And that frees us up to spend all of our time not searching for sources of yield for our LPs, but instead searching for partnerships, integrations, building new things that are cool, and building on top of what we've already got. And I think that's a big edge. But we won't know how that manifests until we actually have a functioning protocol, and that's what we're working on right now. And eventually we're going to get there. And when we do, I think that's going to be all bets are off as to what's possible, I think. So has anybody got any more questions? If not, I think we will start to wind this down. Been just over an hour, and for anyone who's not caught it all or missed it for whatever reason, I'll upload a recording somewhere and let you all know about it, so you can catch up on what's been happening. And then we'll hopefully roll out some docs, white paper and stuff in the near future, and test nets, and as I say, hopefully get a thing sent out in Q4. Yep, I think that's it. So thanks, guys. Thanks for turning up. Thanks for asking questions, and just thanks for sticking with us, really. Because it is it's not an easy journey, I'm not going to lie, but it's a fun one. It's not easy, but it's fun, and I have a deep appreciation for everyone who's stuck with us, because there's many faces still around from V1, and I certainly couldn't blame anyone for not wanting to stick with us. That would be a perfectly reasonable thing to do, because I mean, we've tried twice and we've had to shut it down twice. It's not an incredibly good track record, but I think there are people who do believe in what we're doing and do believe that we can execute on it, and believe that we have what it takes, and I really appreciate that. I couldn't ask for a better community, really, so thanks, and yeah, I'll hear from you again soon, I guess.